වැඩියෙන් භාගයයි කලක් පවතින අලුත් පෙනුමයි.
Tonight, inoculation drive. Moderna COVID jab rolled out for the Sri Lankan public for the first time. War on drugs. A haul of heroin found and suspect shot dead in several STF and PNB operations. Cost of lockdown. To lockdown or not to lockdown? What's the best way forward?
What is needed is to achieve a decent balance.
Out of the country's GDP, the Western province accounts for about 40%. If you have a lockdown in the Western province, it will affect the entire country in a very clear manner.
The impact is not a homogeneous impact.
Pay struggle. Future of the teacher strike to depend on the 20th showdown with the Education Minister. All that and much more coming up on First at 9. This Sunday, the 18th of July, 2021.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයිෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වලකයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammika Kanai. Now, the Moderna COVID vaccine was rolled out for the first time in Sri Lanka today. It was used on the over 30 population in the central province, with those eligible from the tourism sector also being immunized with the US manufactured vaccine. Meanwhile, State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Channa Jayasumana, responded to the remarks made by MP Professor Tissavitarna, insisting that the vaccination guidelines and the procedures the country follows are laid down by the World Health Organization and not by the government.
The first administration of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine in Sri Lanka was done today. The beneficiaries were persons above the age of 30 in the central province. Those engaged in the tourism sector in the areas of Dambulla, Sigiriya and Galewala in the Matale district falling within the specified age group were inoculated with the Moderna jab. A consignment of 1.5 million Moderna doses arrived in the island on Friday via the World Health Organization's COVAX facility. In the meantime, the Family Health Bureau has requested the Ministry of Health to look into the possibility of using the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for the inoculation of expectant mothers. Director of the Bureau, Dr. Chitramali De Silva, stated that only the Sinopharm vaccine is currently being administered to expectant mothers. She added that nearly 2,500 expectant mothers had contracted the virus in total and 13 have since succumbed. However, there are only 175 active cases among expectant mothers. With the target of vaccinating all above 30s in the island by September, 167,462 persons were given the jab yesterday, using the Sinopharm and Pfizer vaccines. By last evening, 5,560,860 persons had been administered with at least the first dose of any COVID jab approved for emergency use in the island. From that, 1,657,716 people are fully vaccinated. Meanwhile, State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Channa Jayasumana, responded to comments made by one of Sri Lanka's leading virologists, MP Professor Tissavitarna. Professor Vitarana alleged that the country's vaccine mechanism is weak.
ඇත්තටම එන්නත්කරණය පිළිබඳව මාර්ගෝපදේශයක් ලබා දීලා තියෙන්නේ ලෝක සෞඛ්‍ය සංවිධානය. අපි දන්නවා වැඩිහිටි අයට ඒ වගේම ඉදිරිපෙළ සෞඛ්‍ය සේවකයන්ට වෙනත් රෝගාබාධ තියෙන අයට ප්‍රමුඛ ස්ථානෙ දෙනවා. නමුත් අනෙත් වයස් කාණ්ඩවල අයටත් ක්‍රමානුකූලව එන්නත් ලබා දීම කරනවා. ඒක ඇමරිකාවේ වුණත්, යුරෝපයේ වුණත්, වෙනත් රටක වුණත් ඒක තමයි සාමාන්‍ය ක්‍රියාපටිපාටි. ඒ සඳහා ලෝක සෞඛ්‍ය සංවිධානය විසින් මාර්ගෝපදේශයක් ලබා දීලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් මහාචාර්ය තිස්සවිතාරණ මැතිතුමා ඒකට එකඟ නැත්තම් මං හිතන්නේ එතුමා ඒක ලෝක සෞඛ්‍ය සංවිධානයට දැනුම් දුන්නා නම් තමයි හොඳ. මොකද එහෙම නැතුව එතුමා මේ වගේ ප්‍රකාශ කරාම සමහර විට අපේ රටේ ජනතාව නොමග යන්නත් ඉඩ තියෙනවා. ඉතින් අපි ඊටාම ගරු කරන කෙනෙක් එතුමා. නමුත් මං හිතන්නේ එතුමා මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් කරපු ප්‍රකාශය නම් නිවැරදි නෑ. අපේ රටේ ජනතාව මේ අසනීපයෙන් මුදා ගැනීමට ආරක්ෂා කිරීමට ගත්ත පියවරක් තමයි සියලු දෙනාම එන්නත් කරන්නේ. මේ වෙනකොට ඒක සාර්ථක වෙනවා. අවුරුදු 30ට වැඩි උදවියට ඊට පස්සේ අපි අවුරුදු 18ට වැඩි උදවියටත් දෙනවා. අවුරුදු 12ට වැඩි පාසල් ළමුන්ටත් ඉදිරියේදී ලබා දෙන්න අපි අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම කටයුතු කරනවා. ඒ ගැන කිසි ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියාගන්න නරකයි.
In a separate development, 2 orangutans and 3 chimpanzees at the Dehiwala Zoological Gardens have reportedly tested COVID-19 positive. Zoological authorities say that investigations are currently underway on the matter. Previously, a lion and a lioness tested positive for the virus, but the 2 animals have since recovered. Meanwhile, a total of 1,452 COVID-19 infections were confirmed across the island by the epidemiology unit yesterday. The Western Province topped the daily caseload with 700 cases. District-wise, Colombo reported the highest number of infections with 322. On the other end of the spectrum was the district of Mannar, reporting just 4 new cases. 5 imported cases were also part of yesterday's caseload. As for today, 1,022 fresh COVID-19 infections have been confirmed so far. In the meantime, the recovery of 843 COVID-19 patients today propelled the country's overall COVID recoveries to 256,676.
අද සේවසකට වැඩි ජනතා විශ්වාසය නව සංයෝගයකින් රයිනෝ රෝෆිං සහ සීලිං ෂීට්.
Now, the countrywide lockdown imposed to bring the first wave of COVID-19 under control last year proved to be a success, which was strictly limited to the health aspect. But as far as the country's economy goes, it was a hefty blow. We explored what the best way forward would be if and when another surge in COVID cases come about.
Sri Lankans came face to face with what is called a lockdown for the first time in March last year with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The primary aim was to save human lives, and it is fair to say that the move was very successful in that respect. But there was a problem. From the 20th of March to the 28th of June in 2020, all aspects of life came to a grinding halt. The economy came to a standstill. Food was hard to come by and production was minimal. People were forced to be at home for over 3 months. Some lost their jobs, while some had to take pay cuts. What's more, the island also saw a considerable decline in its exports and thus foreign exchange earnings. As things looked to be getting on track with some control over the pandemic, the country faced a second wave of the virus. During it, a total countrywide lockdown wasn't imposed to curb the virus spread, but from the 29th of October to the 9th of November, the Western Province was locked down. Looking back, all these lockdowns incurred a great loss to the country's economy and placed a substantial burden on the government. To ease the burden of the people, the government provided a 5,000 rupee allowance to families affected by the pandemic. The World Bank placed the number of families to have been benefited from the move at over 5.6 million. According to the Ministry of Finance, the COVID-19 related expenditure incurred in 2020 accounted to 117.5 billion rupees. It accounts for 3.6% of Sri Lanka's total expenditure for 2020. The sum spent on giving the 5,000 rupee allowance in April and May of 2020 alone was a staggering 56.59 billion rupees.
In the first quarter of 2020, total national income had gone down by about 16%. Overall, for 2020, we have recorded the lowest economic growth this country has experienced since its independence in 1948. The rate of decline in the whole period was something like 3.6%. There were also large budget deficits, large increases in money supply, increases in debts of the government because of this problem.
The 5,000 rupee relief payment was revisited when the Western Province was locked down for 10 days during the second wave. The cost of it was 6.9 billion rupees.
Out of the country's GDP, the Western Province accounts for about 40%. So if you have a lockdown in the Western Province, it will affect the entire country in a very clear manner. And the country's GDP also would suffer greatly. So I think locking down the country is a very grave step and must be taken with very clear understanding of the consequences, and the consequences can be extremely negative, and locking down even the Western Province can have very grave consequences as well.
Following a blissful phase of low new daily caseloads, another wave of COVID-19 took the country by storm this year in April, right after the Sinhala and Tamil New Year. Given the volume of cases, the health sector was in unison when it's called for another countrywide lockdown. Their desired lockdown was not just for a couple of weeks, but for at least a month. But this time, the government dug its heels in, and instead of moving for a lockdown, it introduced chosen travel restrictions, which ensured that certain economic activities in the country were uninterrupted.
Previous experience, we know that complete lockdowns could be very effective in terms of controlling the spread of the disease. But then its economic costs also can be very high and very difficult to manage during particularly this period of low growth. What is needed is to achieve a decent balance between these two objectives while maintaining the economic activities to the best possible extent. Also introduce necessary movement controls so that the spread of the disease can be kept under control.
Ever since the onset of the third wave, the opposition has been backing the health sector in calling for another lockdown. However, when asked to comment about the best way forward, parliamentarian of the Samagi Jana Balawegaya Dr. Harsha De Silva, a former Minister of Economic Reform, had this to say.
It is clear that lockdown has a tremendous cost on the economy and it has to be balanced. What we see is the cost of the lockdown hasn't been equal across society. If you look at the structure of our labor market, out of about 8.2 maybe in employment, you see about a quarter in agriculture, about 28% in industries and the rest in services. And if you look at the formality, informality of the structure, you'll see about 90% informal in agriculture, about 67% informal in industry and about 50% informal in services. The impact of the lockdown is generally felt far more on the informal, self-employed, low productivity worker. Here there is a slight difference in that those workers in urban centers have felt it more than in rural areas. For instance, World Bank says even though Western Province has close to 28% of the entire labor force, about 37 to 40% of the job losses in the first phase came from the Western Province. The impact is not a homogeneous impact. So one has to look at carefully the kind of lockdowns that may be envisaged in the future.
There are countries which used complete lockdowns time and time again to bring their pandemic situations under control successfully. But Sri Lanka's economy pales into oblivion in the presence of those. New Zealand imposed a strict lockdown to curb the spread of COVID-19. Its economy contracted 12.2% in the second quarter of last year. But by June 2020, the country had over $17 billion in foreign reserves. A similar lockdown was imposed in Sydney, Australia in June this year, and it is still in effect. The country is losing $150 million a day as a result, and it could end up wiping about $7 billion from the country's GDP owing to the loss of economic activity. But Australia can afford to do it. It's a highest income country, with forex reserves in the excess of $47 billion. Compare that with Sri Lanka's $4 billion reserves coupled with its debt obligations. It becomes apparent Sri Lanka just cannot afford a complete lockdown anymore.
If you take people who are daily paid, what happens to them? You have small businesses which rely upon their sales on a monthly basis. So if you have 1 month of stoppage of work, how do you manage? What happens to the staff who have to be paid salaries? So these are all practical issues that can be disturbed very, very badly if you have a lockdown. We've got to understand that there are immediate repercussions, short-term repercussions and medium-term repercussions, all of which have to be managed. So that is why it's important that we allow people to go about their business with the health protocols in place. If you stop every activity, then this whole situation won't work. Spending money is one thing, but at the same time, ensuring that the people's livelihoods are not affected is another very important facet of this whole exercise. So that balancing act is what is important.
We will see you on the other side of this break. Bear with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, a series of operations conducted by the Police Special Task Force and the Police Narcotic Bureau have led to the death of a suspect and the discovery of over 12 kilograms of heroin and over 13 million rupees in cash. Now, here's a roundup of those operations.
A special operation was launched by the Police Special Task Force last night after being tipped off about a group of persons transporting weapons in a vehicle. The STF had followed the vehicle in question and inspected it at around 12:30 am. One of the three persons inside the vehicle had then attempted to evade the police. He had run away while firing a weapon at the police. In response, the STF personnel had returned fire, injuring the suspect. He was then admitted to the Negombo hospital, where he succumbed. Police identified the deceased suspect as a 44-year-old Lalit Vasantha. The police said that the deceased suspect has even had contacts with former Negombo prison superintendent Anuruddha Sampayo.
ඔහුට එරෙහිව දැනට අධිකරණයේ නඩු 20කට ආසන්න සංඛ්‍යාවක් විභාගුවෙන් පවතින බවත් ඉන් 6ක් පැහැර ගැනීම සහ මනුෂ්‍ය ඝාතන බවටත් වාර්තා වී තිබෙනවා. ඒ වගේම මීට කලකට ඉහතදී මොහු මීගමුව බන්ධනාගාරයේ සිටියේදී ඔහුට අධිශීතකරණයක් ආදී උපකරණ සැපයීමක් සම්බන්ධයෙන් බන්ධනාගාර අධිකාරිවරයෙකු වැඩතහනමට ලක් වූ බවද වාර්තා වෙනවා.
Meanwhile, the police apprehended the other two suspects and found a micro pistol inside the vehicle. The Negombo acting magistrate also conducted an on-site inspection this afternoon. In the meantime, around 13 kilograms of heroin was found from a house last night during a special operation conducted by STF personnel in the area of Colombo. Investigations have revealed that the stash of heroin belongs to the infamous drug racketeer Kimula Aleguna, who is currently in India. The drug racketeer's brother, identified as Suresh, had handled the drug network. Kimula Aleguna and 3 others had been arrested at the Chennai airport by Indian authorities on the 31st of January this year. However, measures are yet to be taken for their extradition. In the meantime, there is a development about the 298 kilograms of heroin the police narcotic bureau found several months ago. Nadun Chintaka, alias Harakata, residing in Dubai, and his accomplice, Charit Sanakalum, alias Ranmalli, had sent the mega haul of drugs to the island via sea route. Further investigations on the latter had led to the arrest of his wife's brother. The PNB had also managed to find 13.9 million rupees from the suspect's temporary residence in the area of Hiripitiya in Pannipitiya. Investigations have revealed that racketeer Ranmalli had used the suspect in his drug operation in the country and to keep the ill-gotten profits safe.
ගෙදරකට තේ හදනවා කියන්නේ වෙනම වැඩ. එක එක්කිනාගේ පදම වෙනස්. මැලිබන් තේ ගෙදර පදමට තේ.
Now then, teachers and principals trade unions insist that they will continue their withdrawal from the online education process until their salary anomalies are rectified. Addressing a media briefing today, they said that the outcome of the discussions planned with the Minister of Education on the 20th will determine their future course of action.
අවුරුදු 3කින් පස්සේ විද්‍යාපීඨයෙන් එළියට එනකොට ඔහුගේ වැටුප රුපියල් 30300යි. දවසකට 1010යි. සාධාරණද මේ? මේසන් වැඩ කරන බාස් 3000 කෙනෙක් රුපියල් 3000ක් දවසකට ගන්නවා. හැබැයි පළවෙනි පන්ති ගුරුවරයා රුපියල් 1498යි. පළවෙනි පන්ති විදුහල්පතියා රුපියල් 1544යි. බාස් 3000ට ඒ අත්තර දෙන සහෝදරයාත් ගන්නවා රුපියල් 2000.
අපිට සාකච්ඡාවක් තියෙනවා. අපි පැහැදිලිවම දැන් තීරණයක් කරන් තියෙනවා. එළඹෙන 22 වෙනි දින දැවැන්ත වෘත්තීය ක්‍රියාමාර්ගයක් අපි ගන්නවා. ඒ වෘත්තීය ක්‍රියාමාර්ගයේ බර තීරණය වෙන්නේ 20 වෙනිදා සාකච්ඡාවෙන් ඔන්ලයින් වර්ජනයට එයාගේ ක්‍රියාමාර්ගයක් අපි 22 ගන්නවා කියලා කියන්න කැමතියි.
කියන සාකච්ඡාවේදී යම් බෙද දැනකට එන්න පුළුවන් වුණොත් වර්ජනය අවසන් කරනද කොහොමද?
අපේ ඉල්ලීම් සම්බන්ධයෙන් ආණ්ඩුවේ සහ අධ්‍යාපන අමාත්‍යාංශයේ ප්‍රතිචාරය ලැබෙනවා නම් ඒ අනුව තමයි අපේ තීරණ ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙන්නේ.
මේ මාස 22 වෙනි දින කොළඹදී ලංකාවේ සියලුම ගුරු විදුහල්පතිවරුන් එකතු කරගෙන දැවැන්ත උද්ඝෝෂණ ව්‍යාපාරයක් දියත් කිරීමටත් අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා.
In the meantime, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa today issued a statement opposing the Kothalavala Defence University bill. Premadasa says that an attempt has been made to take the KDU outside the legal framework and remove it from the purview of the University Grants Commission in violation of the Universities Act No. 16 of 1978. He also points out that the power to appoint the Vice-Chancellor, Deans and other officials of the university and to decide on courses has been removed from the university and brought within a hegemonic structure. Premadasa goes on to say that he opposes the KDU bill since it also gives the university power to award degrees to other regional schools, educational institutions and training institutions. Finally, the opposition leader says that if the government tries to amend the University Act arbitrarily or attempt to pass the Processed Act, the Samagi Janabala Vegya is ready to mobilize the people and defeat those attempts.
Sri Lanka has become the first country in Asia to put forth a submarine cable protection and resilience framework. Over 99% of all international digital data and communications are transferred via a network of more than 400 cables, which span a distance of over 1.8 million kilometers across the world's oceans. Sri Lanka has certain responsibilities in this regard since several cables run through Sri Lanka's jurisdiction.
Secretary to the President Dr. P.B. Jayasundar had chaired a stakeholder meeting last Thursday, during which the Submarine Cable Protection and Resilience Framework had been launched. The International Cable Protection Committee estimates that internet traffic increased between 25% and 50% between November 2019 and the early stages of lockdown in April 2020, and this will likely continue as we adapt the new normal. Speaking at the launch, Foreign Secretary Admiral Professor Jayanath Colombage had highlighted that Sri Lanka had been working with international partners such as United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes, Global Maritime Crime Programme and the International Cable Protection Committee in order to develop a national plan on submarine cables to provide protection and resilience for Sri Lanka, having understood the threats and responsibilities of having several cables running through its jurisdiction. Program Coordinator of the UN Office on Drugs and Crimes Global Maritime Crime Programme, Caitlin Meredith, had said that UNODC values the continued leadership of Sri Lanka in the development of its national framework as well as the sphere of maritime security more broadly. In Sri Lanka, developing of the framework had been undertaken jointly by the Telecommunication Regulatory Commission and the Ocean Affairs, Environment and Climate Change Division of the Foreign Ministry with the technical assistance of ICPC and UNODC GMCP. The process had started back in September last year. At the launch of the framework, Minister and Deputy Head of Mission at the Japanese Embassy in Colombo, Kitamura Toshihiro, had noted that the national framework would certainly consolidate Sri Lanka's aspirations to develop into a commercial and financial hub as well as a global innovation hub as envisaged by the vistas of prosperity and splendor.
We will see you shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, market analysts predict that the overall market index could be volatile in the upcoming week as investors look for stable counters while also paying special attention to dollar income counters. Last Friday, the all-share price index ended 0.24% lower at 7,966.95, while the S&P SL 20 index of more liquid stocks gained 1.05 points to close at 3,030.27. Here's Dimantha Matthew with the market forecast for the week ahead.
So looking at the upcoming week, we feel that the upcoming week will be a bit volatile, with investors more looking at the fundamentally sound counters and special interest on dollar income companies. So these sectors are coming to the limelight at the moment, and investors seem to be gradually shifting their focus into these sectors, which is helping the index to readjust. So basically, with some of the illiquid counters that could come down in value, we feel that the index could be volatile in the upcoming week.
And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.